Everybody, welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We're back to you live again from Washington, D.C. This is our second show for the day. Had a really good one with Professor Omer Bartov earlier today, but now then we have fan favorite Matthew Ho, former State Department official, former Marine, combat veteran, and friend of the show. Welcome back, Matt.
Hey, Danny, it's good to see you. Thank you for having me back on with you.
Always a pleasure. Love having you on. I remember those days we used to meet over one of the metro stops in D.C. when we used to have these conversations. So I'm actually enjoying that we get to do these more often, especially with you being down in North Carolina.
Right.
This is really good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the topic we have to discuss today isn't quite as good, but it's also very educational and a necessary, tough conversation that needs to be had. We had earlier today, Professor Bartov talking about the difficulty that is necessary for this war to come to an end in Israel and Hamas. And he wrote a piece in the Guardian where he said a political settlement is necessary no matter how hard it is. And he talked about some of that. We're actually going to play just a bit of that later on and get your views on it. But the other big part of that whole conversation and the big issue that's really the elephant in the room is the Palestinian people. So no matter how this war started, no matter who's at fault, no matter what transpired, the people of Palestine pay the biggest price. And I'm a bit disappointed and discouraged and disheartened that in the Western media, the United States in particular, there's not much focus on the price being paid by the Palestinian people. It's almost like they're an afterthought, or like, hey, they deserve it. They voted for Hamas. We can get into what that actually means. But the consequence and the cost is so great that I think it deserves a spotlight on its own. We have specifically asked you to come on and talk about this because you have some experience in the area. You've actually been to this to see the Palestinian people and how they've lived. And we're going to ask you to talk about that a little bit. But first of all, I want to show just a couple of clips from, I believe, a documentary that was done about your experience there. And Gary, roll that first one.
I felt it would be helpful and advantageous to have a team of U.S. veterans to come to Palestine. As you know, veterans have a special voice and a special platform to speak from.
I mean, you can read all the essays and books, and you can watch documentaries and interviews, but you have to be here to really get to understand what is occurring here, how the settlements are utilized to squeeze the people and to make them miserable, to punish them, to humiliate them.
We were like a lot of gas canisters. We cannot breathe. We're afraid right now. Here we didn't know what to do, so all the here's me. We went like on the windows getting us out.
You know, the first time I saw the gas being used, the tear gas being used against the Palestinians, and because we were with them, by extension us. And, you know, I saw the Palestinians run away from it. And that stuff was more powerful than anything I've ever experienced.
And in this next clip here is when you're actually outside and you're kind of talking about something that's happened. And interestingly, I think in this clip here, there's actually, you can see some of the IDF soldiers in there. And I wonder if you could talk about that on the backside of this. But I want people to particularly pay attention to the last thing you say in this clip about what the U.S. government role should be.
Coming through a tree line, so they're going to come down onto the road there. And so some of the young men went running down the street to cut them off. Very brave, very dangerous, but you know, just I think like what young men anywhere do who are being occupied, who have had enough of seeing their families being disrespected, being abused, who've just witnessed their mothers and sisters being punched by men in their 20s and 30s, and they've had enough, and they've had enough for a long time. And this will go long and on and on and on until the American government stops subsidizing the Israeli occupation of Palestine.
Now, if only we had done that, because unfortunately you couldn't have known at that time, but you said it'll stop until, or it'll continue until the U.S. government does that, or until there's an explosion and a massive war that results in unbelievable destruction. Now, I pointed that last part out there about your comment about what the U.S. government should do, because another American had a very similar comment just a few days ago.
You recently wrote an op-ed suggesting that there should be conditions to the U.S. relationship with Israel and that the blank check approach must end. The White House argues it is not a blank check, although we did hear the president over the weekend say that conditioning aid may be a worthwhile thought. How do you respond?
Israel was attacked in an absolutely horrific way by Hamas. 1,300 innocent people were slaughtered. Israel has a right to defend itself. But what Israel does not have a right to do, in my view, is to kill 12,000 people in 6-7 weeks, 2/3 of whom are women and children. That they don't have a right to do. That's a violation of international law. The United States has always provided support for Israel. I think we have to continue to make sure that Israel can defend itself. But we also have a right to say to Israel, I'm sorry, you can't just do all kinds of bombing, which are killing innocent men, women, and children. And also, in talking to a very right-wing Netanyahu government, we have got to say, you know what, we need some thoughts and movement forward toward a two-state solution to deal with the crisis in the West Bank, where Palestinians are being thrown off of their land and are being killed. So we need, in my view, to say, if you want money from the United States, you know what, you got to hear what we want as well. We just can't get a blank check.
Man, there hasn't been many people saying that out loud, much less from the halls of the U.S. Senate or a major publication like he did there. But unfortunately, there's not many of them. Matt, I wonder if you could, first of all, just kind of take us back to 2017. And I saw you were wearing a sweatshirt there, Veterans for Peace. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what that is and then what specifically took you to Palestine.
Yeah, thanks, Denny. So Veterans for Peace is a national, but also has international chapters as well. Organizations of veterans who are opposed to U.S. militarism, opposed to U.S. wars, opposed to the massive defense budget. And most of us have gotten out of the organization because of our participation in the military, and many of us, our participation in, we don't have any more World War II or Korean War vets among us. The last ones just died, but we certainly have plenty of Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghan, and larger global war and terror veterans who, have gotten to this point where to travel in like-minded company with folks who believe in a peaceful U.S. foreign policy as opposed to militarized foreign policy is something I think a lot of us were searching for. And so grateful that for Veterans for Peace to have been around for 40 years now to find that spot for people who think that way.
And let me ask you, Matt, what is, I guess, if there is a common thread among Veterans for Peace, not just people who want peace, and there's, there's a number of those. I wish there were more of them. But what is it specifically about veterans, especially those who've had combat, seeking peace? I mean, is there any common threads about why they're choosing that path when they had been, signed up to go and help fight wars?
Well, I think for whatever it was that brought someone to that point, and people joined the military for a lot of different reasons, right? A lot of it economic, some because of patriotism, some because they want the responsibility, they want to see the world, so on and so forth. But I think what it comes down when you get in the combat and you see the realities of that, the eternal truths of it, as well as eternal truths of the larger war, the blessings of peace, you come to realize that nothing is worth warfare. Nothing is worth the organized murder of people by nations. Nothing is worth it. And so this idea that if we took part in something that scars many of us, something that we carry a guilt or regret for, one of the ways to help heal, to recover, and to allow ourselves a future is to work for peace. And so particularly too, as Veterans for Peace, that is quite the statement, right? That's quite the brand, if you will.
Like, here's a little bit more, right? A little bit more weight. Yeah. Yeah. But now what took you specifically to Palestine? And in fact, what brought the organization there?
So there are Israeli and Palestinian groups that are similar to Veterans for Peace. One is called Breaking the Silence, which is specifically Israeli military veterans who speak out about the occupation. So very similar to American veterans who go to America's wars overseas and they realize, I've been lied to. We're being betrayed here. What are we taking part in? What is this for? There are many Israeli veterans who go into the occupied territories, do there to occupy, fulfill the role as occupier, and then come out and say, my God, this is not just morally wrong, but it's also incredibly counterproductive. It's making Israel safe. So that organization is called Breaking the Silence. And there's another organization called Combatants for Peace. And that's a collection of both Israeli military veterans and former members of the Palestinian resistance who, realize that violence is not going to lead us to security. It's not going to lead us to
either
peace.
side.
It's going to make things worse. And so that connection there between Veterans for Peace here in the U.S. and those organizations, but then also too through because Veterans for Peace does a lot of peace work with civilian or citizen organizations, and so you're part of the larger peacemaking effort. So we had many connections with Palestinians who were engaged in nonviolent resistance to the occupation. So that was our primary goal, was to go there and spend 3 weeks in Palestine.
3 weeks. Okay, so it wasn't just popping in.
No, it was 3 weeks. We were in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Of course, we could not go to Gaza. Gaza's under blockade. It has been under blockade since 2007 or so. But so one of this was to go and stand in solidarity with these Palestinian nonviolent resistance organizations. But then the other aspect of it was to try and go and speak to members of the Israeli army or members of the Israeli border police who are taking part in the occupation, saying, hey, look, many of us were engaged in occupation ourselves. There are 3 of us who are Iraq and Afghan vets. And so we can speak to them about these were our experiences.
And so did you have any conversations like that with active duty?
We did. We did. We would make a point of approaching them directly. And so we had our Veterans for Peace shirts on. They could, and we're Americans overseas, so you can tell us a mile away anyway, right? But we would make a real effort at trying to engage them as compassionately and as openly as possible, to let them know that we were in the same positions that they were, because we were what we were seeing occur there was very similar to what we had done in Iraq and Afghanistan. So whether it was the raids on the homes, whether it was the checkpoints, whether it's even people being shot and killed in the streets of where they were born by foreigners, right? That type of that reality of the environment in which Palestinians live. And so obviously you have Israeli soldiers who are going to say, this is not what I thought I was going to be doing here. Yeah. These are not the barbarian terrorists we were told we had to worry about. If we just left them be, left them alone, went back home, they would not be throwing rocks at us or Molotov cocktails or perhaps setting off an IED every now and again in response to our brutality.
And did you maintain any contact with any of the people that you met there? And have you talked to them in this current situation, especially those in the West Bank?
With Palestinians, yes, absolutely. With some of the folks from Breaking the Silence and Combatants for Peace, other people within Veterans for Peace have been speaking with them as well. And they are under tremendous pressure, as people probably understand. The sentiment in Israel following the attacks on October 7th have really made it very difficult for people to speak of peace, for people to speak of reconciliation, for people to speak of negotiations. So certainly we have folks here who are offering them as much support as we can.
That's actually what I wanted to delve into, is just how incredibly difficult it is right now, but also desperately needed, I think, is to speak into this chaos and this violence and this heightened emotions really on both sides, because you can certainly make the argument, and many have, that much of the Israeli policies over decades helped build some of the resistance and the anger and the frustration among the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And that helped lead to some of this. And you can also say, but from the Israeli position, what happened on October 7th was grossly out of proportion to what, had happened before then. And then, innocent people being slaughtered and attacked, et cetera. And so right now I think you have on the Palestinian side, you have this extraordinary anger toward the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli government in general, especially of Netanyahu. And you have on the Israeli side extremely high anger and even hatred among the Palestinians, because they view, all of you guys together, Hamas, Palestinians, the PA, Palestinian Authority, they kind of view them all the same. So they all deserve the same outcome. And right now you don't seem to have any empathy towards either side. Now, we were on, I had a show earlier today where I had a former IDF officer who's now a professor at Brown University. And he was telling us a little bit about how difficult this is, what's necessary to have a solution, but why it's so hard to get.
The only way that we can get out of this is to change the entire political paradigm. And changing the political paradigm means that first you must replace the leadership of Hamas. Hamas cannot remain the political and military hegemon in Gaza. It has become entirely discredited after October 7th, and they're promising to do it again and again. They're not a partner. And you cannot work with the Netanyahu government that for decades had actually perpetuated this situation of helping Hamas exist there so that it could say, we have nobody to talk with. And now,
and it just kind of went on from there, but that was the gist of it, that look, the views are so hardened right now that no one's willing to even listen to the other. You have Israel, who is in the dominant power position, so they want to solve this militarily. They just want to go in and then clean up Hamas and rid the place of Hamas. And then they, at least Netanyahu says out loud, that's going to bring peace to Hamas. And then, of course, you have the Palestinian people who were utterly powerless on the other hand. And what do they have to go on? But the idea that they're going to be basically cowed into submission and beaten and destroyed and then become passive, how do you view that? Is that, in other words, is the Israeli tactics and their strategy, is it viable, even if we take the logic or the morality out of it, but just say, just in practical terms, is it possible for Israel to bring peace to their people by the tactics they're using right now?
Well, I think it is, but not for the reason I know what you're going to, Danny, on this, in the sense that if their tactics is fulfilling a strategy of ethnic cleansing, then yes, right. And if that's their goal for security, ethnically cleanse the areas, historic Palestine, create a buffer around Israel proper, remove 2 to 4 million Palestinians to other nations. If that would be a successful achievement of their goal.
Well,
but the problem being is
that implies that Egypt, for example, or
right.
Jordan or some of these others would be willing, and so far they are adamantly opposed to that. Ergo, if Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the others stay steadfast and saying we're not going to allow them to come out of there, but Israel continues on its current path, then you have the problem that then you may be killing everyone, whether from starvation, thirst, disease, or the bombardment, even in addition to that. And then that's why I argue that ultimately it can't succeed, because the cost would be so high that I don't think Western support would be staying steadfast that long when the death toll starts to go really higher.
Right. I mean, and part of that plan relies upon these Arab countries, these historical enemies of Israel, to actively take part in Israel's ethnic cleansing, right? So in order for it to be successful, Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, etc., have to say, okay, we're signing up for this plan and we're going to participate and everything else. Now, we know that the United States actually has gotten on board on this with some more reporting this past week. I believe in The Hill it was, on this type of plan that's gone around Congress. Representative Joe Wilson has been very verbal about it. But then also, too, as we saw in the White House's supplemental budget request, which I think might be coming up this week. They're going to try
what did Wilson do? I missed that
part.
Oh,
Wilson just has been speaking very publicly about this plan to move the Palestinians, particularly the Gazans, out of Gaza, right? And 1 million will go to Egypt, 250,000 will go to Iraq, 250,000 to Syria. Like, it's all divided up. Yeah,
I had not seen that.
Yeah, I think it was The Hill. But anyway, we also do know, though, that the U.S. In its supplemental request that's going before Congress, $13 or $14 billion more for Israel, includes hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to assist in such a migration. You go into that, right? I mean, so you have under the section for humanitarian assistance or development or whatever they were calling it, monies being appropriated to allow for the resettlement of people, right? To create tent camps that can accommodate, in Gaza's case, more than 2 million people. And that's been a plan that has long been floated, this idea of moving Gaza into the Sinai Desert, moving them into Egypt, and then, of course, building a wall behind them. The wall already exists. But, because that's the reality here. And this gets to one of the central aspects of the grievances of the Palestinian people, that the people that were made refugees, particularly starting in 1947 through 1949, and then again in 1967, be allowed to return to their homes, which they have the right to under international law. And it's never been allowed. And that's just one of the many grievances that the Palestinians have.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, because that gets complicated. So that's the completely understandable angst of the Palestinian people, because they want to go back to their homes because they didn't agree to anything. They got shoved out there in 1948. They want to go back. But now, on the other hand, in this current environment, making this so hard, you have the Hamas leaders, even recently, even after all of the October 7th and everything that's been going on since that time, are still saying things like this.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها، لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية، يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك إحنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة، إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها، وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا، حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة، لأنه إحنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات أن نقاتل.
So the question, Matt, I'm going to ask you a really easy question here that you can solve. When the emotions are so high and the grievances by each side that they feel, because each side, both the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Arabs, primarily say, okay, I see what was done to us and how we feel about that, and you got to do something different because you got to change. And then you have the Jews on the other side who just have not only what happened on October 7th, but then they have the leaders of the people who did that still saying stuff like that. And then we had another one where some of the other leaders were saying, they're going to continue fighting and wage war. So right now, there's no one to negotiate with. Even if Netanyahu wanted to have a negotiation, he's not going to be able to negotiate somebody who's still saying, we want the eradication of all the Jews out of the whole area there from the Jordan River onto the sea. So in that environment, what could you even possibly propose that could bring an end to this, as someone who desires peace, who desires all the people, both the Israelis and the Palestinian people, to be able to just live life free of not worrying about whether they're going to get killed or not?
Yeah, this is an inevitable point you reach when you put off negotiations, when you put off talks where there's nothing is ever done in good faith, when you have things occurring such on the U.S. level, the protection of the U.S. for Israel, say through the United Nations, or the mass amounts of money, billions of dollars that have gone there for a very long time. This is the point that you're going to get to. And on the same side too, then on the Palestinian side, where you see no possibility of negotiations, there is nothing that's going to be done in good faith. You know your own history. You know that you were dispossessed over the last 100 years. It really starts before the 20th century, but really picks up following the First World War. This disposition of lands by the Palestinians by the Israelis. And not having that heard, right? Not having that acknowledged. And then you just see generation after generation where the occupation, and whether you're a Gazan, whether you're in Jerusalem, whether you're in the West Bank, the frustration, the horror it brings, the suffering, the hardship, right? And so when there's no other outlet, you then turn to the violence. And this is like a point you're asking before. We got kind of sidetracked on ethnic cleansing and all that. But, in terms of whether or not this Israeli approach to just defeating, if you will, having victory, in Gaza is going to work. And I think when you're dealing with occupation, there is subjugation, as we described with talking about ethnic cleansing. And then there is just the humiliation that comes with occupation, because it just will not ever, resistance will be a wellspring from occupation, right? And then the further it goes on, the more harder the crackdown is, the tougher the occupiers are on the population, that violent resistance becomes more extreme. And so this idea that we're going to come through this, and that there's going to be a willingness for the Gazans in particular to just submit to the Israeli and the U.S. dictates that would be put forth. I mean, so we'll see a Hamas 2.0 or something.
Right.
Something else, and it will be worse. It will be more extreme. It will be more reactionary.
That's one of the things. I mean, that's the reason why we say so often on our show here, you can't kill your way to peace.
Right.
You can't kill your way to get this, because, and we've seen it happen so many times, Matt, and that's the truly frustrating part here. And I think you made such a unpleasantly good point about the fact that this is the consequence of not dealing with things when you could have dealt with them. In 2017, when you were made that statement there that we showed just a second ago, if the U.S. had done what Sanders is suggesting that we do now, in 2017, there might never have been an explosion here. There might never have been a violent reaction, because if you give any chance for the Palestinian people to have a hope that they're actually going to have some kind of peace, even if it's an imperfect peace, even if it wasn't what they wanted, complete and total freedom. I mean, that's the ideal place. But when you deprive of them any potential for hope, and as we showed in our earlier show today, Netanyahu was saying, there's never going to be a two-state solution. There's never going to be freedom for the Palestinian people. Then this is what you have. But now we have it. Now we have this horrible situation. And now then the cost and the pain to get to someplace better is just astronomically higher than what it could have been in 2017. And that's the real frustration point for me. And I wonder how many more people are going to have to die, how many more Israeli soldiers are going to have to die for a fight they shouldn't have even been in right now.
I think, as your earlier guest described it, you have to have a complete paradigm shift. And when you say something like that, the idea of it is, it seems impossible. Like you're going to change the not just the environment and the names and faces, the economic circumstances, but the whole spirit, the whole moral reason for Palestinian people, the whole moral reason for the Israeli, all this stuff coming into mix here, that's what you have to change. And when you're just pursuing actions that just reinforce the status quo. And I mean, this is why certainly the Palestinians have a right to resist. And their attacks on the October 7th attack was inevitable. And I think if they had just kept it confined to attacking military bases and police stations, the world would have had a more charitable view towards them. But Israel's response is so brutal that I'm sorry, I got a fire truck going by, and my dog wants to join in, obviously. Yeah, but I don't know if you can hear that, but
that's how I feel sometimes too. So
yeah, so I apologize.
Sorry, man.
So, I mean, but so what we're saying though is that the resistance is only going to grow with the heart of the crackdown, and so what we see will be a continuation of this war, unless that is some type of paradigm shift, which really requires, I guess, some type of almost like societal collapse to have that happen. Because I mean, their history has been so informed, or how they view the world, so informed rightfully by their history of an oppressed people. And certainly the Palestinians are informed by the last 100 years of being colonized. If people don't understand what it was like 100 years ago, 95% of, or I should say only about 5 or 6% of the population of historic Palestine was Jewish, and they owned about the same amount of land. And so within decades, you see that explode into 30, 40% while becoming a majority of the property owners in Palestine. I mean, so that complete flip of the paradigm, if you will, right? Where now you are having this a societal restructuring, occurred then, but we obviously are living with the results of that. And so this idea that somehow Hamas leadership is going to change because as they said, they're going to continue to do these attacks. And I think, there's a charitable way of looking at that statement as opposed to saying we're going to do more horror attacks, more terror attacks on you. I guess the charitable way of looking at that statement would be is that what you can infer from that is that as long as there's occupation, there will be resistance, which I think most people get. Most people understand that as long as there's occupation, there will be resistance.
And of course, from the Israeli side, there's zero chance that they're going to say, okay, we recognize we should have done something in 2017 or earlier than that. So let's talk with that Hamas guy. Because, see, that's never going to happen. No Israeli person, no matter where they fall, do it.
With domestically, their political situation, the far right, the hardliners that are in charge, this is why they're there. This is their ideology. This is their ultranationalism. This is the religious zealotry that's a part of all of this. And the Palestinians have those things on their side as well, which makes it so difficult. Right. And then when you have like an October 7th attack, it proves the hardliners right. It validates them. And they see us, and they see.
So they try to make that statement out there, but I think that actually it's starting to fall on deaf ears because there's apparently a growing part of the Israeli population that views it, instead of validating what they said, they're saying you brought this on us. They're recognizing some of these things, and apparently Netanyahu's days are numbered politically, and I think he knows that, and so it could be. What's necessary is whether the United States to step up as a third party that has purse strings that Israel desperately needs to say, hey, like Sanders said, there's going to be some real strings attached on this deal, and you're going to start working towards some peace, or these strings are going to tie up the aid, and you're not going to get it. And then within the Palestinian population, there's going to have to be some people that say, hey, Hamas, you guys brought a lot of this stuff on us. Because of your actions, you're out. We're not going to pay any attention to you. We're going to form a new entity, and that's up to them to figure out what that's going to be. But I think it's going to take something like that so that there's a chance for a paradigm shift, because you're 100% right. Without a paradigm shift, the two sides that are in power now cannot bring themselves together. They can't find peace. And that's what the millions of people on both sides of that line desperately need.
Right, because the political success of Hamas, the political success of the far right in Israel is predicated upon this conflict, this war. And so at very least, keep it in a simmering stage. And in Netanyahu's case in particularly, I think most people are, pretty confident in their assessments that he is done once this war is over. And so two things: will you see his government try to do extra legal, extrajudicial type of extra legislative type of reforms, if you will, decrees, proclamations that keeps him in power? So we can't just say, we're seeing Ukraine, right, where we can't have elections until this war is over. Could you see that happen in Israel, where we can't have elections until this emergency is over? I mean, because also too, the other aspect of why you won't see negotiations is that they've said that there won't be negotiations.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and so even though we had a very successful, but there was a very successful, 7-day long ceasefire, successful prisoner exchanges, hostage swaps, a degree of aid getting into Gaza that wasn't getting in before. The success of that shows that they can negotiate. They can.
It's necessary.
And so, but what you saw though was that in the day or two before the truce stopped, the agreement came to an end and wasn't continued. You had the Israeli National Security Minister, so one of the far right cabinet ministers in Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, put out a very simple tweet that said ceasefire equals dissolution of the government. So Netanyahu's in this case, right, where he's got pressure from the hostages' family. He's got the pressure of we didn't even talk about the reports that came out last week, documenting how the Israelis had the blueprints for this attack for a year ahead of time. So there's all those kinds of pressure. But then he's also got the pressure of the far right that is the reason he's in power, who want this war to continue, who want to see the ethnic cleansing,
and
who
that's
want
what we're going to have to do. That's what has to change. But we're going to have to leave it there for right now. We will definitely keep following this story, and we'll probably pick this up the next time that we have you back on, because unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon.
Yeah.
But as always, Matt, thanks for coming, and we so value your passion for peace and your desire for everybody on both sides of this, the regular people, to be able to just live in peace. And we try to have that same focus here, and we're grateful to have you on our show.
All right. Thanks, Danny.
All right. And that's all we have for you guys today. We got a bunch of other great shows that we're going to have for you later this week. And with all the things that are happening in Israel and also in the Russia-Ukraine war, don't forget about that one. Unfortunately, that's still raging as well. And we're going to have some interesting information for you the rest of this week. But we will remain unintimidated and uncompromised on bringing you the truth, no matter what it is. Whether anybody wants to hear it or not, you're going to get the truth. We thank you for joining with us, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.